Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast, basketball edition. I am your host, Josh Amick, with my co-host, as always, John Allen. Sorry we missed you last week. John was a little under the weather, and he was also covering state wrestling tournament, so we just had a lot going on. But we're back this week and get ready to wrap things up as the season kind of comes to an end, starting to get to almost playoff basketball, so a lot to talk about. We have to start off, John, talking about the Brawl of the Wild. It was a game that didn't disappoint. Came down to the wire, 89-85, but the Grizz got it done. They extended that winning streak to 9. What stood out to you in this game and just the way the Grizz have been playing over the last, month or so?
Yeah, well, one of the big things that I noticed, it felt like Montana was at the same time in control of that game, but also that Montana State was never out of it. Like, both teams played incredibly well, and down the stretch there, Montana State had multiple opportunities. I counted 7 3-point plays, the old-style 3-point plays that Montana State had, especially down that late run. They just couldn't convert the free throws, it felt like. It was chances to cut the game back to one possession. In the last 30 seconds of the game, a chance to make it a 1-point game to where if Montana makes both free throws, you still have a chance to tie it. And they just couldn't convert it in those situations. So, but on the same time, UM was able to, break the game open at times. Kai Johnson again showed out he did in the first time these two teams met. I think he had 23 this time. So, he likes to play against Montana State apparently. But Montana it felt like they just kept growing the lead back out to 7 or 10. Montana State cut it back in, and neither team could really, definitively take control of the game.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you brought up something that I was going to talk about too, was just the free throw differential. Montana made the most out of their opportunities. They went 21 of 26. Montana State, they were home. You figure they would shoot better with them being the home team, but they go 20 of 33. And like you said, towards the final stretch, that really kind of showed its face. And We expect in a game that's a rivalry, it's always going to be more physical. There's going to be a lot more opportunities at the free throw line. But I think that was one of the main things that stood out to me, is that Montana just executed on the road, and I thought that was super impressive. You have any final thoughts for this game?
I think it's impressive that gets the Grizz back to the 20-win mark, second straight season for that, and the 6th out of 11 seasons under Travis DeCuire. 20 wins in the Big Sky is difficult. Montana plays a very difficult non-conference, which I'll bring up a little bit later here in the podcast. But, it's an impressive win for UM, but it also, I think, is a good performance for Montana State as we get to the end of the season that gives them a lot of hope for what they can put on in the Big Sky Conference tournament and this last week.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that too, because even after us taking a little week off, there's still not a lot of clarity in that middle of the pack of the Big Sky Conference. So we'll break down a little bit more of that as the show goes on. But one thing I do want to talk about is the Bears aren't going away. The Grizz have won 9 straight. The Bears are still one game behind them as far as the standings go. They have that split series where they each won 1. So these last 3 games of the season really could switch between the 1 and the 2 seed. It looks like they're guaranteed one of those teams is going to get the top one's going to get the second one. I don't think the Vikings are close enough to them. But do you think that's also kind of playing the advantage for the Grizz, knowing that as good as they're playing, there's a team still on their heels? They can't really let their foot off the gas.
Yeah, I think that's always good. You did mention that they kind of locked into 1 and 2. That is official now. Portland State's 3.5 games back. Montana only has 3 games left to play, so they can't fall back that far.
But they can fall back to 2, though.
They can fall back to 2. It's a half game between them right now because Northern Colorado only has 2 games left. They've played an extra game so far. But they have that extra loss compared to Montana. So Montana still holds their own destiny. Win out the last 3 games, they will be the 1 seed. But 1 and 2 both get the bye. It's just about who you play in that first that quarterfinal game.
Yeah.
On Sunday. So, it's it's an interesting situation for both of them, because now you got to look at what they have left. Northern Colorado, of course, has Northern Arizona left on their schedule. That's their pairing. So, you don't have that extra game. That's why they have that game. Montana has that extra game on the week. And then we get the last game of the season where Montana hosts Eastern Washington. But, that difference right now in the standings is Portland State beating Northern Colorado. And you look at what Montana has left, and they have Portland State on the road, which is what Northern Colorado lost. So I think we're shaping up for a great final weekend. I don't want to make a decision on who's going to come out on top because I think we could be even going into this conference tournament.
Yeah, that would be great. That'd be great for the podcast if that ends up what does end up happening. But we're going to get a little more into like the schematics of the schedule and like we talked about those middle of the pack teams because those really won't get figured out until the next 3 games, in some cases 2, are actually played, and we have a clear understanding. And we were talking about it earlier, how the Big Sky tweeted out if the season was to end today, where it would shape up. There's still a lot unknown. That's why I said if it ended today. So we'll get a little bit more into that later. But we have to pivot now to the women's side of things, and they keep it rolling. The Bobcats now are up to 15 games straight. They now have a 2-game lead in their standings, and they own the tiebreaker. So it's a lot different with the Grizz situation where it's a split series. The Bobcats are in the driver's seat now, but NAU is still not ruled out of the first seed. It would take an epic collapse, obviously, for the Bobcats not to lock that up. But just talking about these 2 teams and how that last game between Montana State and NAU was the last time the Bobcats did not win by double digits. So do you feel like we've kind of already said this earlier, like they're probably going to win out. They're probably going to go undefeated in conference play. But is there still room for improvement with this team, things that they can get better at before the tournament kicks off?
Yeah, I one thing that I like to see is just kind of how they shoot the ball.
Yes.
I feel like at times this season they've had issues with getting points, and the defense has saved them. Defensively, they're an incredible team. We've talked about it multiple times that they have a switch. You don't score when they flip that switch. So, but offensively, if they can go out and do what they did against Montana and make that kind of a consistent offensive showing for this team, the ceiling for this team is incredible. I mean, we could potentially – they have the ability to get to the Sweet 16 if they can figure out how to score.
Yeah.
I don't think that they get a lot of respect nationally.
No, they're still not getting any votes, which, by the way, I do want to talk about to the committee about that. Not even one vote for this team was won 15 straight, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, there's what, 5 teams in the nation, 6 teams in the nation that have 2 losses, and Montana State's one of those teams.
Yeah.
So I think that they don't get the respect that they need to nationally, but they're going to be a team that's going to be difficult to play as long as they can get through this Big Sky tournament into the NCAA tournament. They're a 14 seed or a 13 seed that's going to absolutely take whoever they get down to the wire. Defensively, they're going to be able to we've seen what they can do, and if they can put together the shooting performance offensively, I think that they definitely have a chance to pull an upset and potentially get to that second weekend.
And it's like we always say in basketball terms that defense travels. So we talk about home teams, and I'm going to get a little more into that too, because as I was looking about the final couple of weeks, I'm just like, a lot of these Big Sky teams on the men's side, they don't perform well on the road, which I'll get into a little bit more later. But I think my one thing that is concerning is we know how good that their defense is, but one thing that a little worries me is they're not a great rebounding team. And you think that defense and rebounding kind of go hand in hand if they're forcing so many missed shots and they're giving them those second opportunity. Do you think that's something that can kind of play into the background, or do you think it's something that, like, they play great defense no matter what? If they don't get every loose ball, you're still not going to get a good second shot.
I mean, it's always an issue when you're giving up second and third chances on the offensive end. I was kind of looking back at that too. And the rebounding discrepancies aren't that big. The one I did notice was Idaho State. I think it was 2 games ago for them. They were out-rebounded something like 34-18, which was not a good look. But even against Northern Arizona, they're 48-41. Against the Grizz, it was 38-31. So they're right in there, and they're pretty close to even. So as long as they don't get blown out in the rebounding aspect, I don't think that it's going to be too big of an issue. Okay. But if you see them go like they did against Idaho State, and they're giving up those second, third, even fourth chances on the offensive end, good teams are going to make you pay if you give them shots. So
absolutely,
as well as defense travels, you do have to make sure you're getting the ball.
Yeah, and then to pivot to the other side of the women's things, the team that has given the Bobcats the most problems has been this NAU team. And in a normal season, NAU is at the top of the standings. Their only 2 losses of the season come from that Bobcats teams. Do you think these teams are on a crash course to like play each other again in the tournament with how well they are and just how close those last 2 games are they played? Or do you think a team like Idaho, who's been playing well all season, and a team like Weber State, who kind of seems to be getting their steam, has a chance to maybe pull off an upset to one of these teams or both?
I mean, you can't count it out. I do think that we are on that crash course though of them meeting up.
Yeah.
But it's going to be all about the mindset that these teams bring into the conference tournament. Do they think that it's going to just be a 2-horse race between them, and that can open the door for Idaho or Weber State to get in there? Or are they going to take each opponent, as it comes? You do still have to win 2 games to get to that championship. So it's going to be all about the team's mindset. But I think, looking at it on paper, there's a reason these 2 teams are 4 games ahead of everybody else in the conference, kind of like the 2 on the men's side. We should be seeing them pair up in that championship match.
To transition back to the men's side of things, we talked about it in the week before's podcast where the Vikings really had a good chance to solidify themselves as that number 3 seed, but they lost both of the games over the weekend. Tough state for them, but looking at their schedule, they have 3 home games left to close out the season, and we've kind of talked about this earlier about the home advantage in the Big Sky Conference, how only one team, which I believe is the Grizz at 7-6, are the only team in conference who have a road winning record. Do the Vikings still have a shot even after that tough buzzer-beating loss to Weber State? My man Blaze Street, by the way, shout out to him, 27 points. I don't know him. I don't know why I said it like he's a friend of mine. But they have their next 3 games at home. Do you think that they still have a good chance to lock this up? Or a team like Idaho State, who had 2 big wins over the weekend with Dylan Darling playing out of his mind, do you think that team can kind of leapfrog this team?
I mean, I think it's going to come down to looking at who they play as well. Being at home is great, but Portland State has the Montana schools on Thursday and Saturday, so Montana State still alive for that 3 seed as well. They're only a game behind, and then Montana, of course, is playing for a conference championship right now, so they of course will need to win any game that they can and not let UNC get back into it. So I think that Thursday's game is going to be really good with Montana State and Portland State battling, because if Montana State wins that, they're even now. Yeah. Those teams would be 8-8 in conference. Whereas if Portland State can get the win, it can kind of solidify them ahead of Idaho State maybe a little bit. I mean, the Bengals have to play the Vandals that Thursday night, and so there's your rivalry matchup with that, like we talked about with the Grizz. Anything can happen in those games. I think the big thing with that one's going to be Idaho shooting. Yeah. So if the Vandals can shoot well, then the Bengals might be in trouble. But I think that if you have to pick one, I think Idaho State maybe has the advantage based on the matchups, even though they are on the road. So but again, it's such a crapshoot in the middle of that, in the middle of the conference, that anybody can win. I mean, we saw it with Weber State. They're having an off year. They've played Montana tight a week ago. And then they come into Portland State and Blaze Street, sends the Vikings home sad.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely just a crapshoot, and anything can happen.
Yeah, and I did misspeak. It's not Montana that has a 7-6 record. It is Northern Colorado. I think Montana, with what their season is left, they still have a chance to get to over 500 with their road record. But talking about wins and losses, we kind of said it earlier where in college, I always felt like there was a big home field or home court advantage in basketball, and the Big Sky Conference is a direct reflection of that. Do you think that is really going to play any sort of factor at all when the tournaments start or come playoff time, or does it not matter where these teams are playing, the best teams are going to come out on top?
When you get to the tournament, of course, nobody's on the road. It's all neutral, and you can say a team's got a home court advantage. Boise is does a good job of that neutrality aspect of it, though. With it's a 9-hour drive if you're going from Missoula or Bozeman. Weber State's closer and Idaho State are closer, but no one's really at home in that situation. So neutrality is a big aspect, and I think that's where the better teams are going to shine. In that same regard, though, it can allow some of the teams that maybe have struggled when it comes to road games, but maybe have played better in neutral and home locations. They can, get their game together and pull it out. And I don't think wins and losses, when you're looking at that overall record as well, I don't think that really plays too much into what we're looking at conference-wise, because That's Montana fair. And Northern Colorado, they're losses, they've beaten each other on the road, and Northern Colorado lost at Portland State. Those are the 3 losses between those 2 teams on the road. But then if you look at the non-conference, just picking out Montana because they're 6-7 on the road, as you mentioned, they went to Oregon, they went to Tennessee, they went to Utah State. All 3 of those teams have been in the top 25 in the AP poll at some point this year. They also went to one of the top teams in the Summit League in St. Thomas for the Big Sky Summit League Challenge. So that's also a difficult opponent. And then they played a Northern Iowa team that shot nearly 70% against them and put up 104 points. So
so the raw record is a little misconstrued. So
exactly. And the Big Sky, it's not a conference that's going to draw teams to play at home all the time in the non-conference slate. So you do have to go out there and play some tough games. Northern Colorado has to go to Colorado and Boulder. And so, there's difficult games all around. So when you look at the wins and losses on the road, you're more than likely going to see Big Sky conference teams at this time of the year, especially with the non-conference, having a losing record. But it's about just kind of breaking it down to that 18-game conference slate.
That's fair. A lot of good points, John. So let's transition now to what we expect this week. We only got 3 games left on the schedule. In some cases, like you said, 2. I want to start off what I think has a very good opportunity to be the game of the week, which is the Bengals on the road against the Vandals. Who comes out on top on this one? What's your opinion?
Well, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think that the big key in this game is going to come down to
Vandal shooting.
The Vandal shooting. If they can get hot from behind the arc, I think that gives them a great chance. That's how they were able to knock off Northern Colorado early in the season. And so, it's a rivalry game, as we mentioned. There's a trophy on the line in this one. The teams are separated by just a game.
Is it King Split again? Is it?
Yep.
All right. So still getting used to the names.
But it's just it's always going to be tight. I think you have to give a little bit of an advantage to the Bengals for how they've played this season. But again, when you look at the records, they're even. It's 8-7 versus 7-8 in conference. You're in Moscow this time and not in Pocatello. So maybe that gives Idaho a little bit of an advantage, but it's just going to all come down to performance on the court as they get going, and I think that's definitely the key is just the shooting for Idaho. Yeah,
I'm curious to see what this matchup looks like because anything can happen in a rivalry game, especially with this much weighing on it. Like it's these teams, Idaho wins, they're all of a sudden tied with Idaho State, but Idaho State, I think. How they played last week, and it's hard for me not to want to pick them, even though they are on the road. I spoke about this in an earlier podcast where, to me, when these games get tighter, when the season gets down to the wire, you need a guard who's not going to crumble under pressure, and I think Darling is an amazing guard. So I'm kind of leaning towards the Bengals in this one, but I would not be shocked if the home team pulls this off. Going on to the team that we kind of talked about earlier, the Vikings, they host both of these Montana teams, and they're kind of both in the middle of the pack as far as the Vikings and the Bobcats go. Is this a chance to capitalize on how the Bobcats played last weekend to keep that road momentum going, or do you think it's kind of different where the Vikings know that they kind of had a couple of rough games and now they're going to come back a lot more focused? What do you think is going to happen with these matchups?
That's a good question. It's really, like you said, Montana State just showed that they can hang with anybody in the conference. Again, with how they played against Montana. Whereas Portland State is going to be looking for a rebound after a very difficult weekend. Now they've got another week of practice. They're able to game plan for a Montana State team that, I think that this has potentially got the game of the week in the conference at this point, with kind of like how we were talking about with the Idaho State-Idaho game. There's just a game between these two in their conference standings. So it's right in that middle ground of who's going to get what seed. They both could get the 3 seed, or they both could fall as far back as the 8 seed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot on the line in this game. I do think, though, Portland State needs to make sure that they're not looking too far ahead and looking at that Montana game as well, because you, of course, want to win out these last 3 games to give yourself momentum. But being in that 3 seed position, it's easy to kind of think that you might be ahead of a team like Montana State already, and then so you overlook them and look for Saturday's game against Montana.
The old trap game, yeah.
Yeah, because you're trying to show that you are one of those top teams in the conference still. So I think Montana State's going to go out there and give them their all, and it's going to be a tight battle between these two.
I'm kind of indifferent on this. I don't really know either. But I will say later on when we get to our picks part of this podcast, I think the Vikings are they're poised to have a bounce back. Whether that is against the Bobcats or that's against the Grizz, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I don't think they go 0-2 again this weekend, especially with them being at home. I think that they know how much is at line or how much is at stake and how much they can fall out of that seed just by dropping a couple more games. So let's switch back over to the women's side of things. Same matchup. We got the Vandals versus the Bengals. Vandals have been playing great all year. But the Bengals have a team kind of hot on their trail, too, as far as the standings goes. With both these games on the road, what are we expecting out of Idaho this week with their matchup with the rivalry and then their matchup with the Wildcats, who are just a couple of games behind the Vandals?
I really think that this is a situation very similar to Portland State.
Yeah,
Idaho's sitting there third in the conference. Weber State's right behind them by a game. And so I think that they go into that Idaho State game. Yes, it's a rivalry, and yes, you expect it to be played close. But are the Vandals going to be looking too far ahead in advance? Are they going to be looking at that Weber State game on the weekend thinking we need to win this to hold on to third place, and then you drop a game to your rivals, and all of a sudden now you're playing a 50-50 matchup against Weber State with the winner getting that third seed for the time being. So I think that's what's going to come down to is just how well do the Vandals come out against Idaho State? Are they going to be looking at it as a rivalry game and a game that they need to win, or are they going to be looking at it as this is the first game of the week, but we need to focus on Weber?
Yeah, I think with the rivalry game, you don't have to get up for it. You should already be up for it. Everyone circles that game when the season starts, and they know when they're playing them and all that. So I think if anything, it could be the reverse effect. I think they'll come out ready for the rivalry game and then maybe not be ready for the third opponent or for their opponent with the team chasing them for the third seed in Weber State. But we'll see. Rivalries, the best things happen in rivalries. So maybe they fall short and then they bounce back. I'm not too sure, but I think this Vandals team has been proving they're tough all year, and I think that they'll find a way to get both of these wins. So with that being said, let's get into my favorite portion of these Big Sky podcasts, which is our picks, even though I'm not the best at them. We're going to switch things up this time. We're going to break down the women's slate of games for Thursday, and then we'll break down the men's slate of games for Saturday just to kind of give you a different variation, and we missed a couple of weeks with our follow-up picks. So let's get into Thursday's games. We got Eastern Washington at Weber State, Sacramento State at Montana, Portland State at Montana State, Idaho at Idaho State. Those are all of the Thursday matchups for the women's. John, what you got for those games?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start off with Weber over Eastern Washington in that first game. And then I think Montana will get it done at Sac State. Montana State, as we talked about, I think that they're going to run the table. So I think that they're going to roll over Portland State, who has had a rough year so far in the Big Sky. And then I do have Idaho taking down their rivals.
Okay, I have very similar picks, but I do have one disparity. I got Weber State winning against the Eagles. I'm taking Sacramento State to beat the Lady Grizz. I just feel like the Grizz are kind of spiraling after all that like midseason, controversy with their coach and everything. I feel like they're they know that the rest of the games of the season may not matter as much. So I think Sacramento State's just going to pull off this win. Just a gut feeling I have. I got the Bobcats keeping it rolling, and then I also have the Vandals taking care of the Bengals. Even though they're on the road, I just think that they're the better team, and they'll pull it off. So let's switch over now to the Saturday's slate for the men's side. We got Montana State at Sacramento State. We got Weber at Idaho, University of Montana at Portland State, Idaho State at Eastern, and then Northern Colorado at NAU. What do you got for those games?
Yeah, well, I think Montana State is going to get a weekend sweep. So I don't think we talked about the men on Thursday, but I do think they'll take down Portland State in a good one. And then I think that they can get the win at Sac State on the road. Weber State, I'm going to have them over Idaho. They've really picked it up at the end of the season. Blaze Street's playing incredible basketball, as we mentioned, with his buzzer beater and 27 points against Portland State. They're on the road again, but I think that they can. Wait, are they on the road again? Yeah, they are. They are.
Yeah,
the women are over back at home. But I think that they're going to get the win over the Vandals. Montana Portland State, I think, is going to be a battle of two teams. I think the difference is going to be how well Brandon Whitney plays for the Grizz, as it feels like when Whitney is on his game, Montana's darn near unbeatable. But if Whitney's off his game, the game's going to be a lot closer. So I think he'll be the difference, and I think Montana gets it in a close one over the Vikings. Idaho State, I have them knocking off Eastern. It's just kind of the Eagles have been another team that's kind of had their moments of bright play. But
our last podcast,
overall,
we were like, are they turning it? And then,
they're back down in the 8th seed now.
Yeah.
And I think that Idaho State kind of seals them into that 8 spot. And then Northern Colorado, I've got them over their pairing. I don't know how much of a rivalry it is between the Lumberjacks and the Bears, but I do have the Bears winning that one.
All right, I got a little bit different picks. I have Montana State picking up the win at Sacramento State. I got Idaho getting it done against Weber, and then in my surprise pick, I'm taking Portland State to beat the Grizz, and I think the reason for that is the Grizz have been playing great basketball. That streak has to come to an end eventually. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they keep it going, but I think they pick up a win on Thursday, and then they fall short on Saturday. That's just kind of my thinking of it. And then with the Portland State, like we talked about earlier, I think Portland State possibly loses on Thursday, but then they're more ready to go for Saturday. So that's just my thinking on that. I'm sticking with the Bengals. I'm sticking with Dylan Darling until he proves me wrong. I'm taking them to pretty much win whatever matchup they have until the tournament starts, until they prove me wrong. And then Northern Colorado, I think they're just a juggernaut. They're destined to be one of these top 2 seeds. They are going to be one of these top 2 seeds, but I think as good as NAU has been kind of playing this year, I think this Colorado gets it done. So, yeah, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. I want to thank John for co-hosting with me, and thank you all for joining us again this week. We'll be back next week, where we'll be able to break down all 3 games, since there are games on Monday next week, and then we'll give you a preview of the tournament with all the seedings and what we expect in those matchups, both for the men's and the women's. So thank you, John, for joining us, and we'll see you all next week on another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. Thank you.